The Formula One racetrack is filled with surprises. Some are thrilling and exciting action that keeps the audience fixated, while some are dreadful incidents that no one wishes for. Today we'll be taking a look at the top 10 crashes in the history of F1. Get ready, it's quite gory. And we'll start with the horrifying crash that sent Alonso's McLaren flying in 2018. Number 10. Alonso's crash at the 2018 Belgian GP. It was the Belgian Grand Prix, and many predicted it would be an uneventful race, until Nico Hülkenberg's Renault crashed into Alonso's McLaren. The impact resulted in his McLaren flying forward and crashing into Charles Leclerc's Sauber. The three-way crash couldn't have been avoided, because all of Hülkenberg's tyres had suddenly locked while he was driving at very high speed. Fortunately, none of them sustained any serious injuries. But this next incident doesn't involve one red flag, but two. Number 9. The 1987 Austrian GP debacle. Even before the race started, the 1987 Austrian Grand Prix was already experiencing accidents. During the practice session, Stefan Johansson had killed a deer that suddenly appeared in the circuit. But that was only the beginning. In the actual race, just a few minutes after it started, an accident occurred. The first accident was when Martin Brundle lost control of his Zach speed, and it went flying into the barriers. His car bounced back into the incoming traffic and it led to chaos. After that, the race was red flagged, the grid adjusted, and the race restarted. But not long after, an even bigger accident occurred. The accident was caused by Nigel Mansell's slow-starting Williams. And it was so bad that 12 cars were involved in some sort of chain reaction, colliding with each other simultaneously. What made it worse was that it occurred at the Oostrijchingstrack, a place known to be very barrow. The race was again red flagged, and it took over 2 hours for the race to restart. Although nothing happened after that, it's a race that won't be forgotten easily. But you should see the next crash. Number 8. Massa's freak accident in 2009. Felipe Massa had gone into the 2009 Hungary Grand Prix weekend with all of his body parts complete, but he almost left the grid without a vital part: his eye. It was the qualifying race and nothing strange was expected to happen. But as Felipe Massa reached one of the fastest sections of the Hungaroring, the spring of Rubens Barrichello's brawn suddenly came flying towards him. Before Massa could swerve or do something to protect himself, the spring penetrated the visor, knocked the driver unconscious, and injured him above the left eye. And because Massa was unconscious, his car kept going. It cut the inside of the left-hand bend that appeared after, went straight across the runoff area, and got stuck in a quadruple-layer tyre barrier. Once the car had stopped, the medical team came running. They did their best to stabilize him and immediately flew him to a hospital for surgery. The Ferrari driver was so lucky to come out alive because the freak accident was one of the worst kinds. Unfortunately, this next guy wasn't as lucky. Number 7. The end of Luciani Berti's career. Luciani Berti was well on his way to winning his 15th Grand Prix when the awful incident occurred. It was the 2001 Belgian GP, and as usual, they were at the Spa circuit. Everything was going fine until his car hit the back of Eddie Irvine's Jaguar on the run through the 180 miles an hour Blanchimont corner on the 5th lap of the race. And the next thing that happened was absolutely crazy. The then 26-year-old's car left the track at a very high speed, bounced through a gravel trap, and smashed into a tyre wall on the outside of the track. If his helmet wasn't made of a sturdy material, he would have died instantly. However, the helmet only kept him alive. It didn't save him from sustaining injuries. The F1 driver sustained so many head injuries that he had to quit Formula One forever. But in 1976, this driver was so close to dying. Number 6. Niki Lauda's close call, 1976. Before several changes were made to Formula One, every crash almost resulted in death. Only a few were lucky to survive with injuries. And in 1976, the then reigning champion, Niki Lauda, was lucky to be among the second group. That year at the Nürburgring, what happened to Lauda was kind of an irony. The driver had seen that enough safety measures were not put in place by the race organizers, and he had tried to warn other drivers about the imminent danger. But they ignored him, and the race continued. At the beginning of the race it rained, and the drivers started with wet tyres. But not long after, the rain stopped, so the drivers switched tyres. Lauda also stopped to switch his tyres and to regain his initial leading position. He returned to the track racing at high speed. The accident occurred shortly after. He miscalculated a move and turned sharply into a corner, and that resulted in him losing control of the car and crashing into the fence. His car bounced back to the track at high speed and burst into flames. As if that wasn't bad enough, an incoming driver didn't know that an accident had occurred and drove into the corner at high speed and crashed into Lauda's burning car. The impact of the hit made things worse for Lauda, as it made it harder for him to get out. He ended up with major burns to his head, hands, and hair, and also inhaled poisonous fumes that affected his lungs. Although he didn't die and was able to resume racing 6 weeks later, it was a really close call. But the next one to be mentioned got every Formula 1 lover sad for the whole of 1982. Number 5. Death of Gilles Villeneuve. The death of a driver can be very sad, but the death of a great driver who had so much ahead of him can be quite devastating. And nobody saw what occurred at the qualifying race at the 1982 Belgian GP coming. It was a regular day on the track, and the ever-confident Gilles Villeneuve got behind the wheels of his Ferrari not knowing it was the last time he was ever going to do so. It was the qualifying race and everyone was doing their best to earn a pole position. But for Gilles, it was more than that. He wanted to get ahead of his Ferrari teammate, Didier Pironi. The reason behind his intense competition with his teammate was that 2 weeks earlier, Didier had ignored orders and stolen what should have been Gilles' win. That had infuriated the Canadian driver, and he was determined to do better than him. But just as the qualifying race was about to end, Gilles, who was going at a high speed, crashed into a much slower car. The impact of the collision caused the Ferrari to fly into the air, and then somersault violently for a long distance. Anyone who saw the wreckage knew it was going to be hard for anyone to survive that crash. Although Gilles was at one point thrown out of the wreckage, he was so injured that he died 7 hours later. It was an awful day in Formula 1, but in 1961, not only the driver died. Number 4. 1961 Italian Grand Prix. The 1961 Italian Grand Prix was supposed to be an accident-free one. The Monza circuit was always a favourite, but the horrific accident of 1961 tainted the circuit forever. Wolfgang von Trips was in an intense battle for the World Championship during the race, so all he was after was crossing the checkered line ahead of others. Unfortunately, in the course of the race, his front wheels collided with Jim Clark's rear wheels. The German driver lost control after the collision, and he swerved right into the spectators' area. This resulted in the immediate death of 15 spectators. The intensity of the accident caused von Trips to also lose his life. So that day in the Monza circuit, 16 people died at once. It was one of the worst incidents to happen in F1. This next crash happened 33 years later, and it was also devastating. Number 3. Roland Ratzenberger's awful end. Usually most accidents happen at the actual race, but during the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix, one happened at the qualifying and another at the actual race, and both were the worst kind. Let's start with that of Roland. It was the second qualifying session, and Roland suddenly lost control of his Simtek Ford. This led to the car crashing into the barriers, and his car toppling over. The fatality of the accident wouldn't have been so bad if his car was going at an estimated speed of 195.7 miles per hour. This resulted in his front wheel penetrating the cockpit and causing Roland to fracture his skull and aorta. Although he was immediately rushed to a hospital, the severity of the injuries made it impossible for him to survive. After the accident, the actual race was supposed to be cancelled because Roland's death was a bad omen, but they went ahead with the race, and it resulted in the death of another driver. Number 2. Death of Ayrton Senna. The 1994 San Marino Grand Prix weekend was an awful one. After Roland's accident, several drivers were destabilized. Senna especially because they were close. His doctors advised him to withdraw, but he refused, saying he was fine. However, he really wasn't. During the race, Senna also suddenly lost control of his vehicle and crashed into the barriers at a speed of 145 miles an hour. The accident was so terrible that it got Senna bleeding all over. He was also rushed to a hospital, but he couldn't survive due to hard brain injuries and ruptured arteries. That was the end of the legendary driver. If only he had listened to his doctors. This next crash was totally unexpected because it happened at a time when the motorsport had upgraded its safety measures. Number 1. Jules Bianchi 2014 Japan Grand Prix. This accident was not supposed to happen, but carelessness on the part of the safety marshals have resulted in the ghastly accident of young Jules. It was raining heavily at the Suzuka track in 2014, and Adrian Sutti had lost control of his vehicle as a result. A crane had come to help the driver get out of the runoff zone, but while they were helping, Jules, who didn't know about the crane, suddenly appeared and crashed directly into it. The accident was so terrible, Jules suffered so many injuries. Although he didn't die immediately, he died less than a year later from the injuries. If only the crane had stayed off the road. Thankfully, the F1 crashes are now less deadly, but every driver works hard to avoid any sort of crash. So what do you think? Any other accidents you wish we had mentioned? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next video.